Welcome back to the Acceptance Project podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Gross. Today I want to start with a question that may feel simple at first, but the longer you sit with it, the heavier it becomes. Who told you the sky wasn't meant for you? Now, not literally, of course. Most of us have never had someone walk up and say, "You're not allowed to dream." People are usually far more subtle than that. Sometimes limitations are delivered in the language of just trying to protect you. Maybe you should lower your expectations. That's probably too hard. People like us don't do things like that. Don't get your hopes up. Or you should just be grateful for what you have. And slowly, without even realizing it, we allow people to begin building those glass ceilings that keep us from achieving our dreams. We allow them to extinguish our own potential. We stop applying ourselves. We stop trying. We stop speaking. We stop believing. We shrink ourselves until our dreams fit comfortably inside other people's comfort zones. But on June 16th, 1963, a woman named Valentina Tereshkova climbed into a spacecraft and became the first woman in history to travel into space. Think about that for a moment. 1963, while the world was still debating what a woman should be allowed to do, she literally left the planet. There's something powerful about that moment, because while one person was breaking through the atmosphere, millions of other people were still trying to survive the gravity of doubt, criticism, rejection, bullying, insecurity, and fear. And maybe that is what today's episode is really about. Not outer space, inner space. The distance between who we are and who we could become if we stopped asking permission to exist fully. So today, we're going to talk about the invisible ceilings people place over our lives. We're going to talk about the shrinking dreams, representation, fear, belonging, confidence, and why so many people spend their lives parked on the runway while staring at a sky they could soar into. I think one of the saddest things in the world is how early people learn to make themselves smaller. Children don't naturally enter the world apologizing for existing. They run through grocery stores wearing superhero capes and rain boots in July. They sing loudly in the back seat. They dance before they know whether they are good at dancing. They ask wild questions without embarrassment. Children believe possibility belongs to them. Then somewhere along the way, the world starts editing people. A teacher destroys the self-image of a student by telling them, "Don't tell them where you're from. They'll never take you seriously." A crowd laughs when the bully picks on you. A friend excludes someone from the group chat. A workplace rewards silence more than creativity, and suddenly people begin trading authenticity for safety. What fascinates me psychologically is that most people don't stop dreaming all at once. It happens gradually, like dimming lights in a room, one bulb at a time. The saddest stories are not always the loud ones. Sometimes they are the quiet moments where somebody slowly stops believing in their own potential. And that brings me back to Valentina Tereshkova. Before becoming the first woman in space, she worked at a tire factory. She was not born into celebrity or privilege. She was not handed a script that guaranteed greatness. But somewhere between the factory floor and the launch pad, she stopped believing small was the only option. How many of you listening today are carrying dreams you quietly buried because somebody convinced you the sky belonged to someone else? Maybe your dream was never space travel. Maybe it was starting over, going back to school, choosing peace, or finally believing you matter. And maybe today is the day we stop confusing fear with truth. People confuse fear with truth all the time because fear is loud, emotional, and convincing. We assume discomfort means danger. Just because something feels uncomfortable does not mean it's wrong. Public speaking feels terrifying for many people, but the fear is often about vulnerability, not actual danger. We mistake rejection for proof of worthlessness. Someone says no, ignores us, excludes us, or criticizes us, and suddenly fear translates that into, "See, you never mattered." But rejection is an experience, not an identity. We confuse other people's limitations with their own potential. Someone else could not do it, so fear says you can't do it either. Somebody mocked your dream, so fear labels the dream unrealistic. Fear loves borrowed ceilings. We create hypothetical scenarios in our minds and then treat them like guaranteed outcomes. Before we ever take the chance, apply the opportunity, speak up, or step outside our comfort zone, fear starts building an entire disaster movie in our head, convincing us it is safer to stay exactly where we are because that could happen. We begin acting as though it already has. So instead of risking failure, embarrassment, rejection, or disappointment, we remain inside the safe zone where nothing changes, nothing grows, and eventually nothing truly fulfills us either. When people hear the phrase glass ceiling, they often imagine something dramatic and obvious, a giant barrier hanging over someone's life like a scene from a movie. But most invisible ceilings don't arrive with warning labels. They show up quietly through comments, expectations, exclusion, or doubt. Through years of being told who you are supposed to be before you ever got the chance to discover who you actually are. And for a long time, those ceilings shaped my life more than I realized. I spent years second guessing myself before anyone else had the chance to, overthinking opportunities, questioning whether my voice mattered enough to take up space in certain rooms. There's something exhausting about constantly editing yourself before the world can criticize you first. You become smaller without even noticing it, safer, quieter, more careful. That's the thing about invisible ceilings. After a while, you stop trying to push against them because you begin treating them like permanent architecture. History is filled with people who were handed ceilings they were never expected to break through. Take Rosa Parks, for example. Most people reduce her story to one moment on a bus. But the deeper truth is that Rosa Parks spent years living in a society built entirely around invisible ceilings. There were places she was expected not to go, voices she was expected not to challenge, and limits she was expected to quietly accept. And one day, she stopped cooperating with the ceiling. That is what made the moment so powerful. Not just that she stayed seated, but that she refused to continue shrinking herself to accommodate injustice. And history shifted because one ordinary person finally said, "That's enough." That is how many breakthroughs begin. Not with certainty, not with fearlessness, but with exhaustion. People get tired of living beneath expectations they never agreed to carry. For me, I think part of breaking free came when I realized my voice was helping other people find theirs. Teaching, speaking, storytelling, building spaces through Bridging Success and the Acceptance Project podcast where people felt seen instead of judged. Every conversation, every keynote, every podcast episode slowly became another crack in the ceiling I once believed was permanent. And maybe that is what people listening today need to hear. Invisible ceilings only survive when we continue treating them like truth. The moment somebody speaks, stands, or finally says, "I deserve to exist in this world too," that is when the glass starts breaking. A friend of mine told me a story about a boy in the neighborhood who everybody thought was strange. You know how every neighborhood has that one kid adults describe with phrases like, "he keeps to himself," which is usually code for "we never took the time to understand him." This kid carried around a cardboard tube everywhere like it was some priceless scientific instrument. People teased him constantly. Kids turned him into the punchline of their own made up space program. "Houston, we've got a problem. Look out, everybody. NASA's in the building." And every afternoon he would sit in the same empty field staring at the sky through that ridiculous cardboard telescope. Years later, my friend learned that the boy lost his mother very young. Before she died, they used to sit outside together at night identifying stars. That cardboard tube was not really about space, it was grief. It was memory, connection, and comfort. And all at once, those jokes carried a kind of embarrassment no one could ignore. That story reminds me how often people judge behavior without understanding pain. We mock what we don't understand. We label people weird simply because their healing does not resemble ours. Sometimes people are not disconnected from reality. Sometimes they are holding on to the hope the best way they know how. One of the cruelest things criticism does is convince people to sit out opportunities they were fully capable of pursuing. People talk themselves out of opportunities before anyone else says no. "I'm probably not qualified. They wouldn't pick me. I'm too old. I'm too awkward. I'm too different." Over time, fear does more than scare you. It begins shaping the entire way you move through the world. What is heartbreaking is that many people are not failing because they lack talent. They are failing because they abandoned themselves before they even began. Imagine standing on a runway with wings attached to your back while arguing with yourself about whether you deserve altitude. This is how many people live emotionally. And every now and then, life introduces someone who refuses to accept the ceiling. Those people become dangerous in the best possible way, not because they are loud, because they are free. A woman once told me she spent nearly 30 minutes sitting in her car before attending her first college class at 48 years old. 30 minutes gripping the steering wheel while talking herself out of walking inside. She said all she could think about was being older than everybody else. What if they laugh at me? What if I can't keep up? What if I embarrass myself? Finally, she got out of the car and she walked into class late, completely flustered, dropped her notebook on the floor, papers scattered everywhere, and she whispered, "Well, this is going horribly already." The entire class laughed kindly and helped her pick everything up. Years later, she graduated with honors. What if she had listened to fear in that parking lot? How many lives would remain unchanged because somebody chose comfort over courage? Sometimes courage does not arrive with applause and spotlight moments. Sometimes it looks like opening the car door and giving it your best shot. I think many people are waiting for a moment that never arrives. The magical day where confidence suddenly appears riding into town like Marshall Dillon. The truth is, confidence usually shows up after action, not before it. Most brave people are terrified. They just move, even though they are scared. I've heard so many people say, I didn't know how strong I was until being strong was my only option. That is important because social media has convinced people courage feels glamorous. Most of the time, courage feels nauseating. Sweaty palms, second guessing, racing thoughts, rehearsing conversations in the shower like you were preparing for a courtroom testimony. But courage changes people. Every time someone speaks despite fear, they reclaim a tiny piece of themselves. Every time someone refuses to shrink, the ceiling cracks a little more. Many years ago, a student walked into my class on the first day. He was significantly older than all the other students, and as he introduced himself, he said he was terrified of returning to college at a much later age in life. When he was in school, a calculator was the closest thing they had to computers in the classroom. No one had cell phones, and the idea of the internet had never even been considered. He felt scared and excited all in one. Finally, when he informed the class of his major, I could see the look on his face as he prepared himself for laughs from others in the classroom. The student shared with the class that he loved singing his entire life, but never auditioned for anything because his father used to mock him whenever he sang around the house. Now, at the age of 62, he wanted to major in music education and teach other kids the love of music. I was so happy when every student in class clapped and cheered for him and no one made negative comments about his age or trying out for American Idol. I never saw him again after that semester, but I've wondered what happened to him, and I like to think he accomplished his dream of becoming a music teacher. In the past, we've talked about belonging and how important it is to belong. Belonging is not about fitting in perfectly, it's about feeling safe enough to exist honestly. That feeling is enough to change classrooms. It can change workplaces, families, and even communities. People thrive where they feel emotionally safe. A single encouraging teacher can change a student's trajectory forever. A supportive boss can awaken confidence that someone lost years ago. A compassionate friend can interrupt isolation. That is why the work of acceptance matters so much. Acceptance is not softness, acceptance is oxygen. Without it, people suffocate emotionally. With it, people grow. There was a janitor at a school who carried a little notebook in his back pocket everywhere he went. One day, a teacher finally asked what he was always writing down. Turns out the man had spent years secretly writing children's stories. He never told anyone out of fear they would laugh at him. One teacher encouraged him to share one story with students during reading hour. The children loved him instantly. The stories were funny and heartfelt and weird in all the best ways. Eventually, the school invited him back repeatedly to read to classes. One person's encouragement changed the trajectory of how he saw himself. Never underestimate the power of someone saying, I think there's something special in you. Those words can become oxygen for a soul that has been holding its breath for years. So, as we come to the end of our time together this week, I want you to think about the invisible ceilings hanging over your own life. Who placed them there? Who convinced you to doubt yourself? Who taught you shrinking was safer than becoming? And more importantly, why are you still obeying voices that never truly understood your potential in the first place? Because the sky was never reserved for the loudest people, or the richest people, or the most polished people. Sometimes the sky belongs to ordinary people who simply got tired of living underneath ceilings. Maybe that is your story too. Maybe your next chapter begins the moment you stop asking permission to grow. Now, if today's episode meant something to you, share it with someone who may have forgotten how capable they really are. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow, share, and leave a review for the Acceptance Project podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And just remember, most people are not held back because they lack potential. They are held back because somewhere along the way, they started believing the ceiling above them was real. Don't let fear convince you to live half a life. The version of you that exists beyond fear is still there waiting for the moment you finally stop measuring your worth through the opinions, limitations, and expectations of other people. The sky was never reserved for only the fearless. It belongs to the people willing to rise anyway. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of those around you. The Acceptance Project podcast is a production of Bridging Success, LLC. To learn more about the podcast and our work, please visit bridgingsuccess.com. This podcast and its contents are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. I'm Dr. Bryan Gross, but I'm not a licensed therapist. The topics and opinions shared by me and any guests are our own and should not replace professional or medical advice. If you're seeking mental health support, medical guidance, or help with personal matters, please reach out to a licensed professional who can provide the individual support you need.